Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm well. My goodness, I feel like I haven't seen you in like 3 or 4 lifetimes.
It feels that way, doesn't it? It's so good to see you. So many
You
things have
too.
shifted.
Yes, yeah, inside and out, right? I feel like we're living in a different world as well as a different internal landscape.
That's so true. It is. And you're in
Yes.
Australia.
I am, yes. Sorry about the time difference.
No
I mean the
worries.
time confusion.
Yes, I checked
Uh,
on Google. So I was like, maybe they're not accounting for daylight savings time
oh,
or
Oh, that can be confusing because part of Australia doesn't and part does. So I'm in the part that does. Sorry, that
Oh,
doesn't. So we're 10
okay.
hour or 15 hours or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're coming in from the
Yeah.
future.
I know it's so weird. I've been here a year and I still feel like I'm upside down and in some other world, like some other planet.
Oh, I love it. I've never been to
Uh,
the Southern Hemisphere, so I can only imagine how different it is. Different seasons,
yeah.
different
Yeah.
everything. You're
It's
literally
just
a day
like
ahead.
Yeah, it really is like being in another world, and your points of reference change, so you don't have the same stars, you don't have the same seasons, you don't have this, you're upside down from everything and everyone you know. So it's like you're literally in another world looking back to the past.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I didn't realize you had different stars.
Yeah,
Of
not all
course.
of them, but there's a
Oh,
whole other map, and it's like kind of upside down. Like it's really disorientating.
I love it. I
Ah,
I'm so happy to
yeah.
have you here.
Yes, I'm glad we
Yes.
could make it work. I'm sorry for the changes on my end as well. I just feel like the last month has been really day at a time. Like it's been really hard to plan anything in advance. It's
Yeah.
like life has just kind of been throwing things at us, I feel
Yes,
like it.
it has.
Yeah,
It has.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I kind of just do these in a way where we just flow and then I edit it later. And then I have
Oh,
some
great.
questions, but obviously anything you want to talk about at all is game. So if you're working on a
Oh,
project and you
wow.
want to share about it, if you're passionate about a topic and you want to share about it, I do have questions about your activism work. And I read your bio
Mm.
for the first time, like your full bio. I don't even know how I haven't done that before. And I was like blown away, Gabriela. I'm so amazed at all you've done.
Oh, oh, thank you.
Oh,
Oh, I mean, yeah, I don't really, to be honest, I haven't done a podcast in over a year. I've just said no because I've been really immersed in just a very internal place. Like, I've been writing a book, and turns out you need a lot of solitude to do that. Like immense amounts of solitude consistently and and attention. And so I think between that and then between moving to Australia, about a year and a half ago now, and um, just lots of personal life changes, I've just kind of gone vroom and just gone inward and and developing this sort of quality of listening to the world and to the more than human world that I was always inclined towards, but never quite gave the attention and the time to, like I have now in the last year.
yes.
So, one of the things that are really alive, just when you say, like, what do you want to talk about? And I'm like, well, I don't really know because I haven't really spoken on a podcast in a long time and have been quite internal. One of the things that are just sort of obvious and are perhaps helpful for all of us is this quality of listening to the more than human world in a time when there is such political and ecological and social and psychic uncertainty and instability, and how important and nourishing it can be for the soul to spend and to offer ourselves time of prolonged solitude and silence with the natural world. so that we can hearken to something older than all of the chaos that we're experiencing at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
So much noise. And I think that the quality of
yeah,
listening can be a really curious one for people to even begin. Just where do you start? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And just I think also because information is so available to us now, like knowledge has been kind of it's almost like become a product. Like
Yeah.
we now live in a world where knowledge is sold, and it's sold in very glamorous ways through social media, and through these sort of like popularity channels, like uh, through movies, through fiction, through it's like we're constantly bombarded with information in glamorous ways, and there's very little substance. It's like my body is like I'm like longing for substance. Um, and I find that at the moment, one of the most obvious places to find it is in the natural world and in the time we spend in silence, because that's when we can start to listen to those old wisdoms that live in our bones and in our blood and in our wombs and in our hearts, and in our ancestral knowledge and in our relationship with our families and our loved ones and our pets. And, that it's like a real return to something simple and and seemingly basic. It's like a principle. It's like the beginning principle. It's like, who are you? Can you be with your aloneness? Can you
Right.
listen to the silence and be with it for prolonged periods of time and treat it as prayer?
Mm.
And can that be enough right now? Like, can we cultivate the courage to do that as a collective? Okay, we've
Love
gone a
that.
bit deep, haven't we?
I love that you called it courage. Where else can we go? But deep.
Yeah, true.
I love that you call it courage. It is so
Mm.
courageous to sit in silence. So much comes up.
Mm,
So much is there to be
mm,
visited that we avoid in our busyness and the
mm,
noise of the world. So I love that.
mm.
It's quite courageous and
Yeah,
vulnerable.
yeah, vulnerable. That's right. I think it requires a sitting with fear, because when you're on your own, you can't not hear the things that we're constantly trying to outrun.
Yeah.
And all the addictions come up, like, oh, I think I'll just go and have a glass of wine, or I'll go and bake a cake, or I'll go and have a cigarette, or whatever it is that we sort of turn to, and instead keep having to come back and go, no, just 2 more minutes, just 2 more minutes here with nothing but me and this tree. um and I've actually I've brought a stack of poetry books. I was like, I wonder if we'll want to read any poems. And so I just sort of choose them, kind of not I don't consciously, I'm not there, I'm not like, okay, Jeanette, which ones could she like? It's just sort of, you're just pulled to them, a bit like form of bibliomancy.
Yes.
um and so of course, Mary Oliver is top of the
Oh.
list, and we're talking about periods of sitting in silence with the more than human world, and she's, the expert on that. Like, she,
Perfect.
yeah. So should we begin with a poem?
I would love that. I think that's very apropos.
Yeah, I agree. So maybe what we can do is just bibliomancy it again. So I'll just flick through the pages randomly and see what opens up, and then that can be the poem for us and anyone listening to this. Hmm. Oh, this is a long one. Let's see. Yeah, I guess we need a long poem. It's a couple of pages, but I'm not actually familiar with this one. Okay. Do you know this one? It's called Have You Ever Tried to Enter the Long Black Branches? I mean, just that title. We can just sort of leave it with that title.
I wonder if this is the one where she speaks of the blue branches and lime and appetite and oceanic fluids of the body.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
I
I'm ready.
hope
I'm ready to
so.
hear it, whether it's that or not.
All right. Have you ever tried to enter the long black branches of other lives? Tried to imagine what the crisp fringes, full of honey, hanging from the branches of the young locust tree in early summer, feel like? Do you think this world is only an entertainment for you? Never to enter the sea and notice how the water divides with perfect courtesy to let you in? Never to lie down on the grass as though you were the grass? Never to leap to the air as you open your wings over the dark acorn of your heart? No wonder we hear, in your mournful voice, the complaint that something is missing from your life. Who can open the door who does not reach for the latch? Who can travel the miles who does not put one foot in front of the other, all attentive to what presents itself continually? Who will behold the inner chamber who has not observed with admiration, even with rapture, the outer stone? Well, there is time left. Fields everywhere invite you into them. And who will care? Who will chide you if you wander away from wherever you are to look for your soul? Quickly, then, get up, put on your coat, leave your desk, to put one's foot into the door of the grass, which is the mystery, which is death as well as life, and not be afraid. To set one's foot in the door of death and be overcome with amazement. To sit down in front of the weeds and imagine God the 10-fingered sailing out of his house of straw, nodding this way and that way to the flowers of the present hour, to the song falling out of the mockingbird's pink mouth, to the tiplets of the honeysuckle that have opened in the night, to sit down, like a weed among weeds, and rustle in the wind. Listen, are you breathing just a little and calling it a life? While the soul, after all, is only a window, and the opening of the window no more difficult than the wakening from a little sleep. Only last week I went out among the thorns and said to the wild roses, "Deny me not, but suffer my devotion." Then, all afternoon, I sat among them. Maybe I even heard a curl or two of music, damp and rouge red, hurrying from their stubby buds, from their delicate watery bodies. For how will you continue to listen to those dark shouters, caution and prudence? Fall in, fall in. A woman standing in the weeds. A small boat flounders in the deep waves, and what's coming next is coming with its own heave and grace. Meanwhile, once in a while, I have chanced, among the quick things, upon the immutable. What more could one ask? And I would touch the faces of the daisies, and I would bow down to think about it. That was then, which hasn't ended yet. Now the sun begins to swing down. Under the peach light, I cross the fields and the dunes, I follow the ocean's edge. I climb, I backtrack, I float, I ramble my way home.
How perfect.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh my.
Ah,
Honey and roses and
mm,
the journey home. That was
mm,
magical.
and that's what this quality of listening feels like. It's like a return home. It's like that rare experience of homecoming where you don't have this longing for something past and gone or this anxiety for something not yet come. You're just sort of there with the daisies and the foxes and the rivers and I think, it's a hard perception to sustain. I don't know anyone who's able to just kind of hold it consistently. Um, but I do feel like the more time we consciously carve out each day, like I said earlier, even if it's just a couple of minutes a day, just go, no, just sit here 2 more minutes with no phone, no book, no conversation, just you and a tree or a river or a particular stone, and see what arrives. It's a sort of experiment on the imagination that I feel like I started really working towards about 3 years ago now, when I first started writing a dissertation for my master's degree. And I was studying with some of the greats in the world of the contemporary greats in the world of the mythopoetic. So Martin Shaw and Alice Oswald and Tracy Waugh. And one of the things that Alice had me do for my study, because I was writing about bees and bees in mythology and bee priestesses called Melissae.
Yes.
And one of the things she had me do, which she called an experiment on the imagination, is to sit with a hive for 30 days for 15 minutes a day and just listen. And what started as a month turned into 2 months and 3 months. And the whole 3 months of writing my dissertation, I was sitting with a hive and I was listening every day. And they wrote my work for me.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
it was a speaking on behalf of something that I've never done to that degree before and that I can't now undo. So any kind of creative endeavor comes from the bees or comes from a willow tree or comes from a particular turn in the riverbed. And that I find is my, I suppose, the language of soul that feels most resonant with the language I think we're all sort of in some manner looking for to speak with God.
I love that, Gabriela. I mean, I
Mm,
read like I knew you spoke many languages. I've been somewhat aware of your
mm,
linguistic proficiency, but to just see this idea of language and the language of nature and the language of the soul and
mm,
English, Spanish, French, some Arabic, Farsi,
mm.
Serbian, Portuguese. These are some of the languages you speak. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it
So
only because of
nice.
the just the nature of my life. Just, I grew up in movement, and
Yes.
so we lived in many countries, and so just at schools we'd learned those languages, and then um, I think I'm just really interested in soul and people, and it's language is the transmission of knowledge. And if I serve at any temple, well, it's that. It's Athena and it's Al Hakim and it's, the goddesses of knowledge. Um, and one of my primary research methods is this direct participation with whatever it is or whoever it is that I'm studying. It's being able to converse and speak directly to people as opposed to just read the texts or just observe from the outside, but to be able to talk, from soul to soul, from human to human. And that's where I learn the most on my field work. It's those simple conversations at, a grocer's or at a coffee shop or waiting for a bus. Um, and they're usually quite basic. And if I don't know the language, it'll be basic English. But it's those conversations that really inform my imagination to then be able to speak on behalf of a people or a culture as I would do for a tree or a riverbed or a hive.
Mm.
Mm,
The bee cult in Greek mythology is such a powerful part of your work. And when I've had the
mm,
opportunity to work with you in the womb shamanism practice, the bees always
mm,
played such a central and pivotal role. And
mm,
I would wonder if you would elaborate somehow on their significance and how their practices can inform us in that discovery of listening.
yeah. I think for me, bees, or perhaps to go back a little more, I think that there are elements of the natural world that have spoken to specific cultures more than others. So, for example, the jaguar has spoken to the Mayans and the Toltecs, and the bear has spoken to the Greeks, the mother bear and the cult of Artemis, um, and the hummingbird and the wolf. And, there's these cultural totems. And so the bee, I found, was one of the cultural totems of pre-patriarchal and pre-institutionalized European culture. And so what I find is really interesting there is that when we hearken to a particular totem, our imagination starts to tune to something that is animate and alive, to a knowledge that is still living, and that is accessible to us all through the mythopoetic. So when you work with the bee specifically, you start to get, it's almost like a key or a door opening into an old world that is the Western world's inheritance, that is particularly the Eleusinian mysteries of cultic Greece, of ancient Greece, and it's also further back into the Minoan world, or the Bronze Age, and possibly even Neolithic Minoan Crete. Sorry, Neolithic Crete and Minoan Crete, so 3,500 BC. And so what's really interesting there is that because my work is really interested in ancient knowledge, I search for these sort of song lines within all the great traditions and within institutionalized traditions as well, like the Abrahamic religions and the Eastern religions, but also in folk cultures and folk traditions. And what I found, and this is something that P.L. Travers, the writer who wrote Mary Poppins, talks about, is that there is this, she calls it a fund of ancient knowledge in our bloodstream, in our very bloodstream, and in the megalithic stones, and that everything that has ever been known to humankind and accessible to the human psyche or the imagination is always available to us and has been impregnated in our inner worlds and in our outer landscapes, like the megalithic stones and like our blood. And so there are certain keys that can help us recover this ancient knowledge that has been suppressed over the past 5,000 years in the modernization of the world and the turn towards a predominant male sky god, and the preference over the transcendental over the embodied and somatic. And so what's interesting about the bee is that she can bring us back into this old consciousness and this fund of ancient knowledge, simply through the art of observation, simply through the art, as we began with, of listening. So we begin to hearken to something older and mythic and soulful. And so my work specifically with the bees has been to observe her behavior as a model for religious experience of women who existed in the ancient world and were known as Melisai, or bee priestesses. And I think this is important because because women's religious experience has not been given its rightful place within historical scholarship. We know very little about the religious experience of women throughout these past, well, really throughout history, actually. I would argue from the beginning, from the dawn of human consciousness. Like we've just, the historians of religion have focused on male religious experience, and women were tending the household. And so you've got these greats like Mircea Eliade, who did these incredible studies on shamanic tradition and experience in Africa and Asia and the Americas and so on. But he really sidelines women's religious experience because he saw them as always tending the home. And what I think he overlooked, and what I argue in my dissertation and in this upcoming book I'm writing, is that actually there was no separation between the secular and the divine in the way that there is now, that that's very much a modern construct, and that the home was the hearth, it was the temple. And that's why ancestors were buried underground and the home was passed down through generations. It was a living temple that honored the dead, where life was brought in, um, that had that faced certain directions, just like the monolithic stones, um, that had certain constellations given more import than others, that favored the equinoxes and the solstices. It's just incredible when you start to listen to the ancient mind, um, without imposing our own kind of um, desires and also conditions on them. Um, so, all this knowledge starts to come forth, and the bee as a model for religious experience is my kind of what I'm honing in on. Like, how can she teach us about the religious experience of these women who were called bee priestesses? For some reason, either they called themselves that or later historians called them that. That's unclear.
Okay.
But what is clear is that they were related to bees for some reason, that something about the bee world was reminiscent of the religious tasks of these women. So that's kind of where I began, and then I have just been sort of brewing in for the past couple of years, and fermenting and turning it into mead.
And probably not for the first lifetime.
Well, well, yeah, it feels like a very familiar
Yes,
place, and I think
yes,
that's what a lot of women feel. Like women who,
totally.
are all there's this massive movement of women who are hearing the bee, and wanting a language for it. And it's almost like it's like there's an opening of a feminine quality that has nothing to do with gender. It's a principle that exists in all things. And I think that the more that that's opening now, the more we're turning towards elements of the natural world that can help us find a language for it. And the bee is one of them, and the serpent is another. Um, so many women, you see the serpent tattoo on the arm everywhere
Hmm.
now. It's like that
Yes.
she's just here, you know. She's just like,
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah,
It's just the return in a
yeah,
way. And do you think that this is
exactly.
indicative of some kind of balance coming to be between like the sacred masculine and feminine beyond gender, but back to the idea of roles and pre-patriarchal ways of being?
I hope so. I hope that's what this is. That'd be really
I
nice,
hope
wouldn't it?
so. It would be so lovely. The tip of the scales.
Yeah, and that we get to live that in our lifetimes. I
Yes.
mean, I imagine that the bees have always spoken. There's just been varying qualities of listening, like varying qualities of attention. And so when bees, for example, for the longest time, like one of the questions I ask in my research is, why is it that the bee has survived in the European psyche? Whereas, say, the serpent was banned and shunned and turned into, Lilith and the devil and the bringer of eternal sin and so on. Um, but the bee survived. She's present in the Vatican in the clothing of the priests, and she's synonymous with the fleur de lis, the what's it called in English? The
Flower.
lily.
Ah.
Sorry, the lily.
Ah.
Yeah, so one of the symbols of the bee that was used interchangeably in Minoan Crete was the lily and the bee. And
Okay.
the lily is still used to this day, along with the bee in the Vatican as a symbol. Um, and so one of the things I think happened is that for the longest time, people thought that the queen bee was a dude. So people thought that They thought that the
Makes sense.
mother, the queen mother, was a king. So they're like, great, here's a symbol for the perfect society and for the clergy and for royalty. And then I think it was in the 1600s or so that it got a bit awkward because suddenly the botanical gardens start to be built and people start to take more of a homeopathic interest in the natural world. So instead of looking out at the stars, they start to look in at what's here. And so they create the botanical gardens and they start to study plants and they start to study bees. And what do you know? They find that the queen she's not a king, she's a queen. And then it gets really awkward for a couple of 100 years where they're kind of like trying to keep it hush hush, like, okay, we can't really deny it, but maybe let's just not make a big thing out of it because this has been the symbol of the perfect society that we've used for the last God knows how many hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And turns out she's a lady. So yeah, it got a bit awkward, and then eventually they couldn't not hide it anymore. And then it kind of just stopped being a symbol for perfect society, and the bee became a symbol of virginity and chastity. And that's why it could remain in the church, because it was a symbol of purity, of, the woman who was chaste and virginal and martyr like, like the Virgin Mary. So it worked to maintain the mythos of the Abrahamic and particularly the Catholic Church. Um, but then what we found is that actually bees are far from virginal. Bees have a really interesting sex life. Um, bees, they're able to reproduce asexually as well, which is really interesting. If the queen bee or if the mother bee isn't able to lay eggs, another of the bees will stay in her stead and will replace her. And without being fertilized, she's able to lay um, asexually, um, through this process of parthenogenesis that appears throughout the myths of the world. So it's really interesting
Fascinating.
what sort of opens up in the psyche when we give the bees a bit more of our attention
Right.
and what they can tell us about both the religious experience of women in the past, but also what happened to knowledge and its suppression, sacred knowledge in the Western world and how we've gotten to where we are now. I think we need to know what happened in order to find power actually in where we are now so that we can move with more um, life force, like with more grace as well, and with knowledge.
Mhm. That's so
Mm.
beautiful. This
Mm.
fascination with the bees, it's really interesting when you talk about the Abrahamic religions, because if you look at Hinduism, the bee
Mm.
plays a very strong role, as does the serpent. And the
Yes.
yoga tradition and the Vedic traditions, and even Brahmari Pranayam, the bumblebee breath, was fascinating because
Yes.
they say in the ancient texts, the Shiva Samhita is one, but that it's the sound of the female honeybee. And I was teaching this,
Wow.
and my nephew said to me, "Well, how do they know that what she sounds like?" And of course, we went online at this point in the world and found out there are distinct differences in the frequency of the sounds. But these
Yes.
ancient, ascetic practitioners were listening so deeply that they could discern the difference between
Mm.
the female and the drone, which a lot of the drones are female too, right?
Wow. Yeah, well, that's
Um,
incredible.
well,
And
yes,
yeah, and just how it tells us again of the sophistication of the ancient mind.
right.
Something that again we've kind of, or the sort of modern contemporary emphasis on science and the logical mind, and to believe what you see and only what you see kind of thing. We've sort of shut down the sophistication and the detailed perception and ability to engage with the more than human world
Mhm.
of our ancestors throughout the world. um, I think from where I'm sort of sitting in the silence of my research at the moment, what I feel to be most true is that there was once a universal worldview that can be traced to the very beginning of human consciousness, to the first examples of religious experience in the prehistoric caves, in the ochre scriptures that I believe were religious icons. I don't think they were just depicting hunting scenes. I think they were religious experience and visionary experience transcribed onto these sacred temples that were the caves, the first temples, that were wombic and that were believed to be the entry to the other world. That there were these membranous places in the natural world, these more liminal places, and that one of them were caves. And so that's why we have evidence for so many religious ceremonies taking place in caves from 60,000 years ago, are some of the oldest ones. I mean, it's so from those first icons, religious icons, that were transcribed through direct religious experience, right? Whoever was transcribing them, and there's ample evidence that they were women predominantly. I talk about that a lot in my lectures on When Women Were the Shamans. That's a series of lectures suggesting that women were the first shamans, that the religious roles were actually once the terrain of women, and that then that started to change. But so from those first icons through into the Neolithic and all the images we have of the goddess figures, that are sort of, again, sidelined as Venuses, as fertility objects, or they've even been dismissed as being sexual toys for men, like fantasy related. And I think that those are just other ways of shutting down the truth about our religious inheritance, the history of religious experience, which is that it began in the caves, it was animistic, it was predominantly looked over by women because women have wombs. So anyone who has a womb or who identifies with a womb, I should add as well. These weren't just gender-based women. These are anyone who believes that they have this energetic entry point between them, their body and the natural world that is wombic. So from those times through into the Neolithic and then the Bronze Age, where you also see goddesses like Inanna in Mesopotamia and Ishtar and Asherah in Canaan, modern day Palestine. And then all the way to Hathor in ancient Egypt, the cow goddess, who's the mother cow, who is also seen in her form of Pasiphae in Minoan Crete, the cow goddess who courts the bull, and you've got this sacred marriage between the sacred bull and the sacred cow. Interestingly, the cows, they're both solar, where the feminine is associated with the sun, and the masculine is associated with the moon. The bulls are lunar. So that's really interesting too. And then you start moving into the suppression, and you start having these invasions in stages into modern day Europe from the Caspian steppe by essentially male god worshipping tribes, warrior tribes. And slowly you start to see the traditions change and the goddess's form change from an earth and nature-based goddess to a sky-related, often thunder, Poseidon-esque, Zeus, Apollo-like gods. And then the cosmologies start to change, and women stop to have such a significant role within the religious sphere. And they continue to still be sort of secondary, to hold secondary positions into ancient Greece. But then you have the destruction of the pagan temples at the hands of the Roman emperor, Theodosius. And so then there's a shutdown of paganism, and then you go into the Middle Ages and you've got the Inquisition. Um, and slowly, there's these really strategic methods of suppressing the traditions of the feminine, of the earthen, of the life affirming, of the cyclical, of the ability for direct experience as opposed to an intermediary figure like a priest or a guru. Um, and then you come to the world as we know it today, and suddenly the bees are speaking again, and so many people can hear them, and it's really exciting. And I don't know what it means, but but what I do feel is hope, because I feel like there's an opening of the mythopoetic capacity again. You know, we're not just looking for a humanoid anthropomorphic figure. We're starting to see import and substance and something of, godliness, something of holiness in the natural world again. And that I find really hopeful.
Godliness in the natural world is so hopeful. It takes that. You have to love something to protect it. You have to revere
Yeah,
something to honor it. And so, I know that your
yeah.
training has been so in depth in the not just the world of academia, but the world of shamanism. And I read
Mm.
that you were stayed with renunciate Jain nuns in the
Yes.
Rajasthani desert and training with shamans, right, in Bolivia and Peru and
Yeah.
beyond. I know you're still doing things. You just came out of Bali.
Yes.
So, so with all of this
Yeah.
work and discovering these earth-based practices and ancient traditions, it must be really rewarding to see that's spreading as it is. But how is the work that you're
Mm.
doing, over the course of all the mentoring that you've done and your online courses and now your book?
Mm.
How do you feel
Mm.
like that's evolving as you evolve?
I feel like it's that's such a good question, and I feel like could feel that's where you were going with it. And I was like, and my knees started to shake, and I was like, God, do I have a redemptive image? Do I have something that's like, and I don't feel like I do, because I feel like the more that I um expose myself to the worlds and the minds of peoples other than my own and other than my own culture, the the more I'm brought into a place of real simplicity and unglamorous existence. It like I was on the plane on my way to Bali 6 weeks ago. I just got back a couple of days ago, and on the plane I was sitting next to this lovely old man who was on his way to a Zen, sorry, not a Zen, an Ayurvedic retreat in Bali. And he practices Zen and Zen Buddhism, I believe. And so we were talking about praying and meditation, and he was telling me how he meditates, and he was telling me about his postures and the time frames and all this. And then he asked me how I meditate, and my knees did a similar shake. I was like, oh, how do I meditate? And and then it just kind of came out of me, and I said, I meditate with my eyes open. But he didn't get it. It was like it didn't what he responded was like, oh, but there's so much going on all the time. We've got so many thoughts. We're always so overstimulated. You really should close your eyes and go inside yourself and try that. And what I meant was, Mary-esque. It was it was I want to see the world around me, and I want to feel myself a part of her wholly, and of course I can close my eyes and meditate, but there's something else entirely happens when I'm either traveling to a traditional culture and sitting at the foot of a wise woman or man, or when I'm sitting under the foot of a tree. It's the
Yes.
same quality of perception that is what we were talking about at the beginning, right? This ability to see, to truly see. It's like a poetic vision and a mythic imagination. Um, and that is what I'm feeling tethered to now.
Mm.
Um, and because I haven't done any teaching work for a few months now, because I've just been really kind of honing in this vision and this book, and I moved into I live in a very remote area of the Australian bush with my partner and our pup. And so it does mean that, for a long time my car wasn't working. And so I really was just stranded in the bush. Oh, it was so hard to start with, right? Again, when like everything in you just wants to run, like I just want to go to a cafe, but I couldn't. And so I was just in the bush. And there's the snakes and there's the mosquitoes and there's the poisonous spiders and there's all this that rekindled my relationship with the wild as well. That the wild is more than just ecstatic dancing on a Friday night in a five rhythms class. Like no offense to that, like there's magic and power there, of course. I just mean that my relationship with the wild before coming here was that. It's like that's
Yes.
what opening the wild woman is. But actually,
Yes. Yeah.
there's this other layer, that's like opening the wild woman is being able to walk through the bush, knowing that there's king browns and red belly black snakes, and you just have to walk. And I'm not very good at it. Like I'm really not very good at it. I rarely do it. It takes a lot of like, inner talk beforehand. My partner would confirm this. But yeah, so in part, this being in the wilderness and being in this silence and not teaching, and saying actually this is a listening time now. And I feel like we all need that at times, right? Like you said, there's so much noise. So to give ourselves that listening time, that grace, to see what's here now and who we are now, knowing that we're constantly undergoing periods of transformation and renovation and renewal, so to give ourselves that kindness, to just take time out a moment from all that and see what's here. Um, and so I think that what I'm sitting with now is that it's guarding over that. Um, like Rilke would say, that the highest task between lovers is to guard over the aloneness of your beloved. So I feel like it's the same individually, like to guard over the aloneness of my inner beloved, you know,
Yes.
that there is no higher task. It's easy to go to the cafe and to get on the phone with a girlfriend, but to guard over that aloneness in times of transformation and change, inner and outer, I think is ultimately the highest task. Mm.
Mm. Thank you.
Mm.
So, as we are very soon moving into the solstice,
Mm,
different
yes.
ones for our
Yes,
hemispheres,
good.
which is so
Mm.
fascinating. Here in the northern hemisphere, it is really a time when a lot of
Mm.
us take that opportunity to go inward. And
Mm,
then
yes.
it's so different where you are now, too, because it's blossoming and blooming and coming back out. But
Mm.
would you be open to leading a little practice for how to embrace the solstice? And I'll try to get this out by the 21st.
Oh, I love that you asked that because winter solstice is my favorite. I always
Yes.
offer a practice on my newsletter. Yes, I'm
Oh,
happy to share it. Yeah. Winter solstice, as far as ancient peoples in the Near Eastern and European worlds were concerned, was a time of renewal, and it had a New Year-esque quality. So it was the death of a cycle and the not promise of a new cycle, because we've got to show our loyalty to it first, but the potential for new life and for freshness and for goodness. And so one of the rituals that I do every winter solstice, and I still do it here because my heart and soul is still Europe, it's
yes.
that land. So the ritual is a 3-day procedure. And so from 3 days before the rising of the sun after after the solstice. So I'm not sure what dates they are this year, actually. I need to look them up. But do you know, is it the 21st?
Think so, but I can double check real quick.
Yeah, because then we can be exact.
Yes.
But
21st at 4:19 a.m.
amazing. Okay, great. So
Eastern
then
time.
on
Yes.
perfect. So then on the night of the solstice, the ritual begins and it ends on the morning of the 21st. So on Christmas morning or Christmas Eve morning.
Yes.
So every night, before going to bed in complete darkness, we write on a sheet of paper our prayers, anything that we wish to seed into the wombic dark. Because what happens over this 3 day period between the solstice and the 24th, which Christianity then adopted as the birth of the Christ, is that there was a belief that the sun stood still. So solstice comes from the Latin sol, sun, and stis, to stand still.
Mm.
And so for 3 days, it was believed that we entered into a liminal time similar to Samhain, similar to ancestor time. There was a liminality, a dreaming available to us, where all the things that we most long for, that our hearts most call for, can come closer, can come into fruition. And so for those 3 days is the potential for dreaming a new life and a new world into being, both for ourselves and again for the outer world as well.
Beautiful.
So the ritual is very simple. Over 3 nights, from the 21st up until the night of the 23rd, to write down all the prayers, rituals, intentions, and to speak them into somewhere of significance. So for me at the moment, I do it in my garden. I go to my garden and my partner and I will speak our prayers into the dark soil of our garden. And we'll do that. And the prayers will be different each night as you deepen into the practice. So you might find the first night you're doing it, you're really focused on your career and your work life. And then the next night, you're going into your family and your health and your community. And then the third night is like your deepest, most secret longings reveal themselves, and you speak them either with someone or on your own, but in witness of the more than human world. So you're seeding your prayers through you've either written them and you're reading them, or you're speaking them out loud into the darkness. And you're doing this for 3 nights, and then you're asking for your dreams to seed those intentions and those prayers into the darkness. So dreaming them into root. Then on the morning of the 24th, if you've written your prayers, you want to burn them on the sunrise. So you wake up at dawn on the 24th, and as the sun moves again after being still those 3 days, you offer your prayers as an offering. And there's often 3 ways to do this. One is through fire, one is through water, and one is through earth, through burial. So it can be in the form of a paper that you've written them on, or it can be, often I work with seeds, like I'll hold a seed as I'm speaking my prayers, those 3 nights, then I take it to my bed, put it under my pillow, and then the next day I speak and I've got the seed and to get, so I'm building a relationship with this seed. And then on the dawn of the solstice, I'll plant the seed into the garden. So it could be something like that. It could be a bone, it could be a shell, it could be an image, something that you've made. But the idea is that you're giving something in return for what you're asking for the year ahead.
Giving and receiving with the natural world,
Yeah,
the etheric world.
exactly.
It's really powerful.
Exactly. It's
Yes.
this age old, again, simple ritual, and I think the cave art was a form of giving back what was being given. So
Mm.
instead of receiving visionary experience or vision from the gods and keeping it for oneself, it was given back. So the art of creating art was a form of prayer, and it was a religious act. It was an offering, a libation. So that's the way I relate with ritual now. It's when you give your in relationality with something other than the small self, and that in itself is religious, right? Because it takes us out of our ego and our arrogance and our hubris, and it brings us into something that is part of the tapestry again of all life. Mm.
It takes great humility to be open to listening to the tapestry of all of life, to be listening to a tree
Mm.
or a bee or a seed.
Mm.
And I think
Mm.
that's where a lot of the magic is. And I love that
Mm.
you weave that into the world in such an incredible and remarkable way.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for saying that, Jeanette. That's really kind.
Yes.
And knowing all the studies you've done as well, and all the teachings that sit behind you, and all the work that you're doing in the world at the moment, and this center that you're opening. And I just see a little bit on your Instagram, but it's just amazing, and so needed. So thank you as well for
Oh,
your work. It's the temples need to be reopened. So thank you for doing your part as well.
thank you. It's been magical to study
Mm.
with you.
Mm.
Yes, I can't wait till you
Oh.
start teaching again. But please do tell us what's the best way to find you? I'll definitely link to everything that you've shared, but I really want people to be able to keep up with your work and keep up with what you're doing, especially if they feel called to this somatic connection with the natural world that is steeped in
Mm.
ritual and mystery and reverence, because I feel like that's just what we need in this time, this connection with each
Mm.
other and with the earth. And the way that you
Mm.
share brings that about in others. I've seen it both personally in
Mm.
myself and in the groups and containers I've been a part of with you as the guide. So,
Mm.
yeah.
Oh, thank you. Um, well, at the moment, yeah, like I said, I'm not teaching, but I'll probably start again in the new year at some point with the monthly ceremonies. I
Oh,
hold
yes.
online monthly ceremonies. So that can all be found on my website once it's up and running, which is gabrielamaya.gutierrez.net, which is probably easier to find in writing. I have a complicated name, it's Welsh and Spanish. But the thing I am doing at the moment is writing a Substack. So I'm writing usually every Sunday, sometimes every other Sunday, pieces on there for all to do with the mythopoetic, ancient religion, women's mysteries. So anytime I'm going on field work or doing research projects, I'll write about it on my Substack. So that's called Under a Fig Tree. That one's quite easy to find. And I think that's it at the moment. I might be doing something with the Psychedelic Society again, but if folks just sign up to my newsletter, I'll send that all out in the new year.
Perfect. So I will link to that. And I've
Mm.
very much been reading Under a Fig Tree. It's wonderful.
Oh.
And I really see, this kind of deep and often vulnerable way that you share about your field work and the experiences that you're
Mm.
going through and that you're
Mm.
exploring. And I just wanted
Mm.
to offer one more peek into your work. And this is something we haven't spoken about yet, but feel
Yeah,
free to share as much or as little as you feel called to. But around
sure.
your activism, I know that you've worked in Palestine and Ghana and other
Mm.
places, really
Mm.
in the realm of improving the human condition and our understanding of what goes on. Do you have anything you'd like to share with
Mm.
us? Or...
Yeah, gosh, I feel like that's such an interwoven part of my life that I don't see it as like a separate thing, because I'm not a political activist anymore or a social activist. Like I don't get out on the streets or run campaigns like I used to. Um, but the way that I am hoping to affect change when it comes specifically at the moment to the Palestinian genocide is through rehumanizing Palestinians by telling their story. Again, to speak on behalf of a people. And that is a huge responsibility, of course, and not one I take lightly. But I feel like I am able to do so to a degree because I studied the Middle East as part of my undergraduate degree, and studied Arabic and spent time in Palestine, and know a lot of Palestinians and have kept in touch with everyone I met at the refugee camps. And I have a relationship with a people and their story, both the story of their suppression since 1948, but also the story of their history and their myths, and this really interesting possibility that we have taken a mythic principle and made it literal by thinking that Israel is a geographical place. And I realize that's going to ruffle some feathers, so you can either include that in this or not, but I'm comfortable saying it, and I will say it, because I can back it up.
I'm comfortable ruffling feathers because,
Oh,
yeah,
great.
we
Okay.
need to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote this piece is free on my Substack. It's called A Manifesto for My Western Friends.
Great.
And it's about the history of Palestine and the what I think is a fact, that Israel was a mythic place. It was a biblical place referred to as a mythic location, not as a physical geographical place for a chosen people. It is like the paradise of the Christians, or the Edenesque stories of creation. It is not a physical place. And yes, there are Israelite people, but the state of Israel as we know it now was created with a political agenda predominantly spearheaded by the UK. But also, it was created as we were led to believe that it was created to be the homeland of the Jews after the Holocaust. But actually, the draft that planned for the creation of a state of Israel was written before the Second World War. It's called the Balfour Declaration. And it was drafted for the first time by Balfour himself before the Second World War began, so before the Holocaust. So, this could be a whole podcast in itself. There's so much to say here, but I think just if I can summarize it to the best of my ability, Israel was a mythic place. The state of Israel, we were led to believe that it was created as a homeland for survivors of the Holocaust, but actually it was planned before the beginning of World War II. And that there is such a thing as Arab Jews, Jews who existed in the Middle East, who still exist, and in North Africa, throughout that part of the world, who are Arabs and they are Jews, and they live alongside Muslim Arabs and Christian Arabs, and Zoroastrians and so on. That our view of that part of the world in the West is very limited. And so we could do really well in educating ourselves more about the history and the peoples and the social reality of the people who live there, of Arabs and Jews living together. With conflict, of course, but when has there not been human conflict in human history? You know, so but we, and when I say we, I mean the European powers and America,
American.
ha have gone in there thinking that thinking that we know best, but actually it's in our interest because there's oil there, because we want to have a foot in the Middle East, because it's a barrier between us and Iran, because it's where there's a strait that's one of the most lucrative oil. What's it called? Sorry, my brain. To go from the mythic to the political. It's fun. Sources of oil
Yes.
in the Western world, which makes Gaza specific, as it goes into Gaza, which makes
Right.
Gaza specifically strategic politically and financially, for the West. So there's so much more going on there than the protection of Israeli hostages, and the dignity of the Israeli people. Many Israelis have been protesting in the thousands to stop and calling for a ceasefire. They can see what's happening because it's been happening for, 70 plus years.
Right.
So, yeah, in as far as my work is concerned, it's in the retelling of the Palestinian story based on the privilege I had of spending time with Palestinian people and spending time on that land in my early 20s, so 15 years ago now,
Right.
and really having it enter my bones, you know. Yeah, it's a part of the world that has been demonized for far too long, and that we need to rehumanize as with ferocity, and non-negotiably.
Absolutely. Yes.
Mm,
And I do believe that this work that you're doing, this work of reconnecting with the earth, brings us into
mm,
spaces where we can reconnect with each other. We've been fed a lot of
mm,
fear and a lot of lies, but when we're
mm,
listening, again, that noise
mm,
can drop away and we can really understand what truth is as it may come to us through a
mm,
tree or through the
mm,
stars or through the connection with something
mm,
beyond ourselves. And
mm,
yes, these practices are so
mm,
important now more than ever. These practices of connecting with the body and the womb and the world that is the natural world.
mm,
So,
mm.
thank you.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, that's a lovely, that feels like a redemptive image you just offered.
Mm.
I think that's absolutely right, that's what's going to bring us back into a sense of humanity again. I wrote recently a piece about being, how I think being human is a rank to be earned. It's not a given. Like, we're all people, we're all biologically people, but to be human isn't a given. And we can see that in the conduct of so many hundreds of thousands of people and the brutality that they're operating under, the violence. Um, but so to earn the rank of being human, some of the scholars and the philosophers of the ages would talk about this angel up ahead, and or the angel out ahead, that that was just a step in front of us. Like the Sufi mystics talk about this being a bit, I would say it's similar to the higher self or the true self, um, that exists just ahead, that's always lighting the way, just a step. That's all we need to know, just the next step. But that if we hearken to this truth, this brightness of who we are, and we give ourselves the conditions to hear it and to see it, um, which is the silence that we've been talking about and the exposure to the natural world, then we can begin to operate from that place that earns us a human rank.
Mm. Yes.
Mm.
And how do we listen? If
Yeah.
we could, if you have one piece of wisdom in a way to leave us with around that or anything else that you choose,
Mm.
or someone maybe even new to this who perhaps doesn't yet have a strong meditation practice or listening practice. And
Mm. I think, in one word, poetry. I think poetry is the thing that can undo the literalisms of our mind, and free us from the quickness that isn't our natural rhythm. It slows us right down and it brings us back into the imaginative, and the childlike freedom, and awe and wonder. So poetry, and starting with Mary Oliver's Devotions is a great one. I also brought Hafez's The Gift today. That's another beauty. any of the Sufi mystics and poets, and for just a couple more contemporary ones, David White. Um, his book Consolations is phenomenal, a balm for the soul. And then, of course, Robert Bly. Um, he is one of the elders of the mythopoetic world. Um, and News of the Universe is just a collection of his poems that are worth having by the bedside table. So, a poem a day, um, and if I can add one other thing, walks, morning walks, ideally, but any time of day, morning or dusk, dawn or dusk, ideally, because those are the dimpsy times, the times when we're not quite here and not quite there, and neither is anything else. So there's more possibility for magic. But daily walks, just even 10, 15 minutes, even if you're in an urban area, just walking around your neighborhood and just see what comes, putting the phone down, putting all the to-do lists away and just one step ahead, the angel out ahead, just following one foot in front of the other and see what happens.
So
And
simple
then
and so
slowly,
profound.
yeah, the simple things,
Yes,
because I think it's
yes.
them that then slowly lead us to being able to sit in for prolonged periods of silence in nature without going for our phones or, tricking ourselves into like, oh, I had to put the washing on, or oh, I forgot I had that appointment, or I should send that email now. And actually to just, be able to just be in the silence. And so maybe trying that as well, for just putting a timer on for 5 minutes and just sitting and, but I would start with poetry. If that feels like too much for the nervous system, I would start with a good book of poems, and for it to be like a Bible by the bed, that informs your dreaming in your waking and in your sleep.
Mm.
Mm.
Immeasurable gratitude for you and for this time that we got to share
Oh,
together. And
oh,
for
yes.
our listeners, I know that you'll be so enriched by this conversation and all the wisdom that Gabriela just had to share. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. It's always a delight to talk to you, because I feel like you're there, you speak that language, and then you synthesize it and you transmit it back in a different way, which is the point, right? Because if it's just me, then but you have this ability to take what I say and then go, yeah, so it's, and in 3 words you've said it. There's a good team effort to talk about things that, to talk about the numinous and the
Wow.
historical and the mythic. It's really hard to do it in words. So thank you. It's a pleasure to talk to you about it as well, because it's in you and you know how to transmit it with such beauty. So
Oh, thank you.
thank you.
I feel like I would love to talk to you forever. Just, there's so much.
Oh,
I'm very much looking forward to your classes beginning again, and to your book that I can read, and to your next Fig Tree
oh.
Substack. And if you ever do come back this way, please come host something here.
Yes, God, yeah,
See,
yeah.
I can do retreat style
Oh,
now. So,
oh yes,
yes, I'm
oh
teaming up with
yes.
some locations in the area for like really beautiful stay overs, and then there's tons of space
Wow,
here. And my vision is to do immersive things. So your
wow.
work, I'm studying cultural anthropology right now in college for the first time, just an elective, and I think of
Ah,
you all the time.
oh, that's amazing.
I really do. It's part of the
Oh,
mandatory elective for healthcare studies, which is interesting, and I love it.
wow.
Mm,
Oh, congratulations for going
yes.
back to school as well.
I haven't
Wow.
gotten a degree, so I'm back at it from the beginning. But
Ah,
it's
I have
okay.
goosebumps. That's so strong.
Yes,
Wow.
yes,
Congratulations.
it's exciting.
That takes courage.
What you're doing takes
Yeah.
courage too, my love. I'm so impressed. And as I said, if you prefer, like I'm gonna give all the links in the show notes, but If
Mhm.
you want to send me a little bio or just let me know, I can take the one from your website, whatever
Oh
you
yeah,
prefer.
sure. Okay, I'll have a read
Yes,
over it again. I haven't seen it in
yes.
ages, so yeah,
Sounds
I'll
like you're
send you an
redoing your
email.
site.
I think so.
Yes. And
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, it's just magical. When what you said about poetry, I heard Michael Mead say that the other day.
Really?
Yes. I've been
Oh,
listening to his podcast a lot while driving, and it was right after the election, and he said, like, how do we find a balm for our souls in this time? Poetry.
hmm.
So,
Oh,
so sweet.
yay. Oh,
Um,
yes. Yeah, oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. That's really affirming.
I mean,
'Cause yeah, not yeah, he's another one of the
he's a
greats. He was
grandfather.
alongside Robert Bly. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Have you heard the
yeah.
Emerald podcast?
Yes, I have. Oh, and he's got an
Gosh.
episode about bees. If you haven't
Yes.
heard it,
I haven't
have you
yet.
heard it?
I just
Oh,
found it like
okay.
a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, how did I not know about this podcast?
Ah,
It's so
amazing. Well, I
good.
hadn't listened to the one you sent me, so I look forward to
Yes.
listening to that one
I think I
because
sent you about fire, but oh, he's just
yes,
magical. All the
yes.
things, yes.
Yes, and that's it as well. There's so many more things popping up,
Right.
around like the mythopoetic and the historical and the
So
spiritual
much.
and so yeah, it's good. It's just I think it's just this like discernment, isn't it, between like
Totally.
the things of substance and the things that are more just like products, like selling
Right.
knowledge as a product.
The search
That's
for
what I'm struggling
quality.
at exactly. Like
Yes.
how do you make it accessible but also be able to make a living and you know and how do you like what's the most sincere and integrous way of doing that work,
Mhm.
like maybe it's doing something else and actually all of that's free, you know but then you have less time to do that, so maybe it's
Right.
like arts grants, like you get grants from institutions but then you're tied to what you can and can't say,
Yes.
so it's really tricky.
It's really complex right now. I think of like
Yeah.
going back to old times in some ways where people have, they're not called sponsors, but you know what I mean,
Oh
where
yeah,
someone
like
would like,
yeah,
they
yeah,
sponsor your work or they sponsor the art that you're
yeah,
creating, and it's sort of
yeah,
those angel investing funds and things like that might
yeah,
be a great place, but even the
yeah,
act of grant writing to get these things is so complicated. It takes you away from the
yeah.
actual work. So, like,
Exactly.
what is the
Yes.
path?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
But I think it gets revealed. I don't,
Right.
I feel like it is always held, even when it feels like it isn't.
Hmm.
There's always those ancestors and those, that council, I feel like, of elders behind us who just kind of, have our back.
Yeah. Yeah. That idea again of discernment around
Mm,
those, the spirit helpers that we have and invite in, and the way that
yeah.
we're listening to the guidance, and all of it is comes back to what you
Yeah.
shared at the very beginning. Like the most powerful thing we can do right now is learn to listen and listen with discernment.
Mm.
So yes,
Mm,
it's a
yeah,
beautiful
and hands in the
practice.
ground, like hands in the
Yes.
earth, like planting something or just like the simple, easy, like
Chop wood,
natural.
carry water.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And wash the bloody dishes. Exactly. Oh, yes. Never better said.
Oh, well, it's been a joy to see
Ah,
you and reconnect. And
yes, and
I'm
you.
honored that you said yes to this. I really am so excited to edit it, put it together. I'll send it to you first for you can have a listen. You can
Oh,
take a look at the
great.
transcript, and then if you want anything changed, feel free to let me know. It's not hard. I
Oh,
used a
thank
program that
you.
makes it really simple. So,
Okay,
um,
don't worry. I'm sure everything we've said, I'm comfortable sharing, so don't worry. Yeah, whatever you deem fit. The Palestine stuff, I speak about it publicly, so
I think it's
I've
important.
been,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I do want to at some point get, I know I started at the very beginning and then life took over, but like you and my
Mm.
friend Levi and my friend Abigail all have a very
Oh
similar thread of
yeah.
how you're being an activist in this arena. And so
Yeah.
I just felt called back then to connect you, but I might call them in for a
Mm.
podcast and then put something together with the three of you speaking about that particular topic,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
we just shared
yeah,
and then them. So, but
yeah.
I'm gonna get this out for the solstice. So there's a little bit of time between now
Good.
and then. And
Yeah,
yeah, I think
yeah,
it's so
both
important for
sound,
voices to be heard.
yeah, I think
Yes.
that would be lovely to get them on board as well, because then
Hmm.
it's just power in numbers as well, and
Exactly. And
to just,
Levi's Jewish, and
oh
you've
wow,
been
yeah,
there. He studied genocide studies in college. I mean,
oh wow, yeah,
yeah, there's a lot of skill too. It's not just,
yeah,
opinions. It's like
yeah,
skillfulness
yeah,
and weaving together that deep
mm,
connection with the heritage and the stories of the people.
mm,
And yeah,
mm.
so
Oh, wonderful. Oh, if you did that, it would be
yes,
so wonderful.
yes,
Yeah, I'm sure lots of people would benefit from hearing that.
yeah. Those beautiful voices with great discernment and like unbiased presentation of a situation. This
Mm,
is the fact. This is the what
mm,
is. Kind of, we need that. There's
mm,
so many
mm,
opinions. So,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
thank you for
Just,
sharing about it.
oh, thank you.
Yes,
Yeah, and for making the
yes,
space for it as well, because
yeah,
not everyone does, and it's hard to talk about things that are relevant without talking about the genocide, because it's like
absolutely.
one of the greatest human rights abuses happening in our time, in our century, and it's here, and we're witnessing it, like, live for the
Hmm.
first time ever. Like, we don't know what to do with that.
Mm.
It's really confronting, and I think a lot of people are struggling with it, and I think one of the responses is to check out,
Yeah,
and to disassociate, which is understandable, but not helpful if we're doing it for more than just a little while, because then how are we socially responsible, and morally responsible humans? How do we hold that rank of being human if we're
right.
just checked out?
Yeah. I remember that
Mm.
when you brought that up, it made me think of the story of the first time we knew that there was civilization was when they found a dead body with a broken femur who had died of old
Yeah,
age. And it was like
yeah,
someone,
yeah,
was human enough to be a care tender to this person. And
yeah,
if we can all just come
yeah,
back to that simplicity, I think this caretaking of each other,
yeah.
we'll
And the
remember something.
mindset. Yeah, exactly. And the mindset that Margaret Mead had there, that, she perceives that as
Yeah,
civilization. So it says something about her own poetic vision, that
yes.
she's not looking for evidence of warfare or of elitism. She's looking at what humans do for each other as indicative of the highest expression of civilization or humanity.
Mm.
And that's another really hopeful thing as well, to keep developing that thinking and that type of perception.
Yeah. Oh,
Mm.
I can't wait to go read some
Oh, yeah.
poetry.
Oh, yay.
I do a lot of bibliomancy, and so now I have
Oh,
some.
oh,
You shared two books that I don't have, so I'm excited. I'll get one for my daughter for Christmas because she's a big poet too. So
is she? Oh,
yeah,
did you have the Hafez one?
I have Hafiz. I didn't have
I thought
the
so.
elder in mythology. I forget his name already, but I have a recording of this,
Yeah.
obviously. The other
Yes.
two I
Oh,
didn't have.
great. Yeah. These guys.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, those guys. Yes.
Yeah, these are really good.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
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 Thank you for everything.
Oh,
You
my
started with a
pleasure. Thank
beautiful
you.
poem, and it was so perfect
Mm.
for what we were talking about, as
Oh,
bibliomancy tends to
good.
be.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I just feel like there's a general tiredness around at the moment. Like, I think we're all feeling it. And so just anything that can, I was thinking today, like, what could be nourishing today? And so, of course, I was like, poems. So I just went and got the poems, and like so many books.
All the books.
Yeah, all the books.
Oh, so
Well,
I'm
have a lovely
so
rest of
happy to
your evening.
you too. So happy to see
Yeah.
you, and so happy to see you so happy. You've always
Oh,
being that, but this is new a little bit for you to love in this way,
oh,
it seems, and in
thank
this
you.
time and phase
Yes.
when you're meeting your like soul partner. Really thrilled for you.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. It is
Yes,
new in this
yes,
way. Yeah, thank you for seeing that.
yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting and scary, but yeah. Yeah. And like mildly terrifying. But yeah.
Not as scary as the walk through the bush, though. So
True. Yeah, that puts everything else into
I can
perspective.
only imagine. That's like real
Oh my
fear. That's not even
gosh.
made up fear. That's like,
That's like real. Yeah, we did it yesterday. We went to swim in the water hole, and it's only like I don't know how far. It's like 4 minutes down the track, but I just don't do it because I
yes.
just don't on my own, never. And yesterday, Leon taught me into it. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be different now. I've come back from Bali. I need to be different, and something has had to change and transform for the better, and I did it. But it felt all right. But it is just that thought that any minute they're just there.
There's
And
this
it takes
snake
away
or a,
the
yeah.
yeah, it takes away the romanticism as well of like being snake whisperers. Like, yes, snakes are symbolic of feminine power, but they could also kill you. And they're
Yeah.
not, like was it Bruce Lee that said like what did he say about he was like oh God, I can't remember something about vegetarians thinking that if they're do you know this one? That if they go to the woods, or what was it? If a vegetarian goes to the jungle and thinks that a tiger won't eat them because they don't eat other animals, they're delusional. Something like that. I've
Right.
totally butchered it, but
But
something like that. I was like, oh God, yeah, I feel the same about snakes. Like, I know their stories and their myths and their history. And, whenever I've posted about them, people write to me like, oh, they're just here to teach you transformation and to get back into your feminine. And all I'm thinking is, this snake had no interest in me whatsoever. It's living its life. I'm not that important. It didn't stop everything to come onto the path so that I could see it.
yes.
It's just living its life. And it just so happens that I came upon it at that time. And they're venomous, they're like some of the deadliest in the world. So there's
Right.
a real like reshaping and rethinking of the wild and our relationship with it, and how it isn't just like we're all just snake whisperers and we can all live happily together. Like,
Right.
no.
There's the mystical and then the 3D reality of the
Yeah,
situation.
exactly, exactly,
And you can live in both
exactly.
worlds. So, I mean, I guess we
Yeah,
need
but
to live
then
in both worlds.
yeah, otherwise it's
Yes.
it's almost like it borders on psychosis.
Right.
It's like everything is here for us and for our own like benefit, and the natural world is just here to teach us. I think it's much less personal. That I don't think that the snake is thinking about me. I really don't. Like, it might do for a second when it sees me and is like, "Who's this buffoon?" But other than that, like it's not losing sleep over me. So
I feel
such
her
a reality
calling in
check.
her meditation.
Yeah, like
Potentially.
it's not, yeah, but it's so medieval. If you think it's this whole idea of like the world, the sun spinning around us,
Hmm.
like God spins around us and the natural world spins around us, and it's all about me, and the bird flies this way because of me, and this and that. And it's like, no, I think reweaving ourselves back into the natural world isn't about seeing what it's there to teach us, but rather seeing what we can give back to it by causing less violence.
Yes.
So less noise, less imposition, less you mean this and you mean that, but giving them the mythopoetic, metaphoric dream language again, like not giving it to them, just learning how to listen for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Blah 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 blah. I could go
I
on
like
about
that you
that.
said that so much because I do tend to like look for meaning and things, but it really is it's so much better if you listen in rather than look up what's the
Mm,
totem of the eagle that just crossed my path
right, yeah. Although
on
that's super
Google.
tempting. Yeah, like I still do that.
My animal spirit cards,
But
all of that has a place, and
yeah,
yet the
yeah,
listening gives us the
yeah,
true wisdom of the natural world and the ability to be in
yeah,
spaces that allow us to have that, or to cultivate
yeah,
spaces is so epic.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
well,
being in the animal body as well, not just the soul, but like the animal in us as well, and being with the animal in them. Like, yes, they have soul, and yes, they're teachers because everything is, and yes, they have meaning, but they also don't because everything has meaning and has no meaning, right? Like there's this paradox we have to live with. But when it comes to like the animal form and our animal form, to go, okay, how does the animal in me respond to the animal of a red belly black snake? It wants to run in the fucking opposite direction.
fight or
It doesn't
flight.
want to sit there and meditate. Yeah, it's like my animal body is like, I am out of here. It's not sitting there going, I'm going to sit and listen for what you tell my chakras. Like it's
Absolutely.
instinctual. And that I'm really interested in as well. Like, oh, I'm learning so much about my animal body that has actually been quite dormant in my time living in cities and towns and comfortable, idyllic, benign villages in England. Like,
Mhm.
none of this has been activated for
It's
me. Whereas in the
primal.
US, like, exactly, it's primal and it's available
Yes.
in the US too, right? Because of bears and rattlesnakes. And, I mean, in New Jersey, we didn't have that, but it
Mhm.
was like, but still, like, there's ways to develop that. But I do think there's something about listening with the animal body as well, not just the soul. Like, how does the animal of my body feel sitting next to the animal of that body, you know? Like a hornet, or an owl or an ant. Like, here we get bull ants who are
Mhm.
like the most aggressive little buggers I've ever encountered in my life. Like, they will fight you. It's like they've got little boxing gloves on. Like, I go out to have my idyllic breakfast with my bees, and I'm like sitting with the hive, and there's my flowers. It's all so lovely. And then suddenly, this little bugger will come, and he'll like start hitting against my big toe, and I've done nothing. I'm just sitting there having breakfast, and he's like headbutting my toe.
Oh my goodness.
Um,
Does it sting or anything, or no,
yeah.
it's just a
Well, if I fight back, then he'll bite me. But it's like
okay.
he's just like
Fight
showing
back.
me who's boss. Yeah, if I like fight back, then I'll get bitten. But otherwise, he's just like, just remember who's boss, Missy. Just like,
Phenomenal.
yeah. So the wild is like in all its glorious
Ah,
shapes and its, like surprising ones and its terrifying ones and its annoying ones. And, you know, I think that's all a part of this listening quality.
yes. Yes. I love it. Listening to the
Oh, yeah.
feeling too. We're so, I mean, even as
Yeah.
we talk about listening, my entire process of listening remains kind of here up, you know, although
Yeah, yes.
like naturally, but then as a practice of listening deep in the womb or deep in the root or
Yeah,
in the movement of the
yeah.
diaphragm and that cultivation too of that somatic
Mm,
practice
mm,
in the idea of rewilding.
yeah, that's such a good point. Like belly listening or like yonic listening, like vulva listening. Like what does
Mhm.
that, how is that, how does that differ to like up here listening or like jaw listening? That's really interesting. I might have to take that on. Thank you.
It's a whole new, well, you taught
Yeah.
me. I remember you started one of the
Oh.
first immersions I did with you. We were
Hmm.
invited to wake up every morning and ask how can we allow our day to be more womb driven, more spirit led?
Yes.
And that was
Yeah.
an opening right there. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Hmm. Oh, good.
So thank you.
Well, it all goes right back round. I'd forgotten.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
All right.
So much love to you,
Well,
beautiful one.
and to you.
Yes.
Thank you again.
You too. I hope to see you sometime in person again soon.
Yes, yes, sounds
Yes.
lovely. And have a beautiful solstice as well.
You
I
too.
hope it's
And thank you for the
fruitful.
practice. I love that.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right. I'll talk to you soon. Bye for now.
All right, bye.